Hello and welcome back Around the Bonfire. It is the show asking you to celebrate Mauricio Pineda. Okay, 10,000 minutes in MLS. I felt like that was a really nice place to start. A quick shout out to him. Really magnificent moment for him, all with Chicago Fire. A real club legend in the making there. But I'm feeling good today because it's a victory Sunday, right? And as always, we're joined by two of the best around. I've got Tim with me here. Tim, how are you feeling today?
Good, man. You know, it's really great that he's celebrating that 10,000 minutes by taking a game off. You know, getting to spend some time on his own with that one. Really timed that perfectly there.
Yeah, I think that's nice. You know, he gets to relax and enjoy himself a little bit too. Nothing wrong with that. DJ is here as well, holding down the local contingency in Orlando last night. I don't actually know if he went to the game, but it would have been funny if he did. How you doing, DJ?
I will not go to it. I've gone to one game in Orlando, and that was their first game against NYFC back in 15. Yeah, no, just that traffic is absolute hell on earth. Like I think it's comparable to Michigan Avenue in rush hour.
Okay, first of all, DJ, you're gonna hate it when you get up here for the game in a couple of weeks, but we'll leave that there. We'll leave that there. You know, you say you don't love it, but then you bought a jersey that you were literally wearing last week. Anyway.
Oh, no, I don't like the game. I don't like the traffic. That's what I don't like.
Well, anywho, we are going to start here again on a victorious Sunday for Chicago Fire as they once again go on the road and beat an opponent that a lot of people thought maybe weren't quite up to snuff to beat. Hugo Kuipers leads the way with 2 goals. Philip Zinkernagel adds one of his own on a gaff by Pedro Gallese. Really star performance from both of them. 2 points from Kuipers, 3 from Zinkernagel. He had 2 assists and the goal as well. Realistically, very, very early in the game, we saw about 35 minutes all Chicago, and then the tables started to turn. But Tim, I'll kind of kick to you on your like one big thought from the game and how you're feeling as you look back.
Mostly that it was good seeing the Fire be able to hang on, right? Like, I don't think it looked entirely comfortable and it wasn't convincing. And for long stretches of it, I think I felt like if Orlando had gotten goal number 2, they would have found a way to goal number 3, right? Like, it's just like the, 2 goals, the most dangerous lead, all that. But the Fire held firm. Like, it was a strong performance from a number of quarters, none stronger than Chris Brady, who ended up getting the game ball. Was not given it by the coach, which is the tradition. Game ball went to Zinkernagel, and Zinkernagel's like, nah, this belongs to Chris. So good on him. He certainly deserved it. But we hadn't really seen the Fire like hold on to a result like that, where they put themselves in the driver's seat and then kind of like let go of the steering wheel, but still got to the finish line, to overextend that metaphor. So that, I think, teaches us a little bit about who this squad is.
Yeah, absolutely. Showing some grit, some toughness, some mental fortitude, as it were. The guys hanging on to that lead for, the better part of an hour there. So a really impressive performance from the defense. And we'll do a little bit of news here. A few kind of basics, right? First, even though we did not see him appear, Jay Devia's red card was rescinded in what was a pretty egregiously bad look for PRO, if we're being candid. But we won't spend too much time on that today. Mauricio Pineda.
The only thing I will say is, like, there's back and forth about it. I think that the refs get calls wrong all the time, and refs are ultimately the arbiters of what happens in the match, right? Like, it's not VAR. Like, they do not supervise the ref. It's the other way around. It's the ref's job to manage everything. It seemed like he was ignoring counsel, which is not what you want to do. Like, you've got to kind of be more of a manager of the officiating squad sometimes, rather than like the individual who's got a firm grip on everything, because it's too much for one person to do. But I think that this shows that overall in MLS, the process does kind of work, where eventually the red card was rescinded. Obviously, like the PK goal that New York City scored, we don't know if the PK would have still been awarded. I don't see how that happens if it wasn't a cautionable offense necessarily. And so that's still on the Fire's record, but ultimately it worked out for I think what should have happened in the match, even if it took, what is that, like 5 days before the card and fine were rescinded. It's confusing because he was given the second yellow on Saturday during the match. On Tuesday, he was given an additional fine. And then on Thursday, it was all walked back. So, but hey, that's life.
And to be frank, his card being rescinded does not mean the match would have changed on Saturday. So it doesn't really mean that. That's all what we're all saying. We're just saying that was a really, really dumb move by the ref.
And I think that like at that, right, Guti's red card was just like almost like textbook, like you can't do that and stick around in a match. And that's ultimately what caused that result. Like that's the refereeing decision, and it was a correct one.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I said as much talking about it earlier in the week. It's like, was it the incorrect call? Yes. I think we can all agree we can give referees a little grace in the moment when you make a bad call. That happens. Obviously, hearing the audio from the call, very concerning, right? To be totally candid, just from his attitude towards it. But ultimately, that's not why he lost the game. It's just not. And to pretend it is a bit silly, if I'll put it nicely.
It's the principle of the matter that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that end, they did rescind the yellow card, even though we didn't see Jay Devia play anyway. Moving on from there, as mentioned before, I'll say it again real quick. Mauricio Pineda reaches 10,000 MLS minutes for the Fire. He sits 15th in club history in total minutes played. So awesome shout out to him. I said it the other day. Never want to see him wear another team shirt. A guy who should retire in Chicago, if at all possible. And then the last bit of news here, and I was kind of getting into it, but Mauricio Pineda, ironically enough, as Tim alluded to, will serve 1 match suspension for yellow card accumulation. So he's taking a little vacation after hitting his big milestone. We also saw a second MLS start for Chris Cupps, ironically enough, against Orlando once again. And one more time, he put Luis Muriel in the Christopher Cupps penitentiary. Really wonderful start from the young man as he is about to head out to join the U.S. Is it the U17 national team or U20?
Yes. U17, Sergio Orhel is going to the U20s.
Yep.
U19s, I think, is it? He's not U17 anymore.
Yeah, I was going to say, he just
No.
turned 17.
I think the U20s are calling people up for the World Cup now, if I remember correctly.
Seems like something I should have had written down. Sorry, everybody.
What is preparation? We don't know what that is.
Exactly, yeah. But multiple Fire first teamers being called into duty for the national side, both at the senior level and at the youth levels. Christopher Cupps, Sergio Orhel, and Christopher Brady have all been called in to this point, and we'll expect to be missing all of them next week, unfortunately. From here, we'll move on to our kind of first big point of the day, and that's kind of this dichotomy of a question, right? Are we calling this a gutsy win or a fortunate victory? Obviously, Fire score in rapid succession early in the game, and then it was all Orlando for that last hour or so. Tim, I'll kind of let you kick off here on how you feel. How you feel looking back at it.
Again, like you have to give the Fire credit for the result. That was my first big takeaway. But like, I think that there's a little bit of stuff that's concerning just with before the game. We talked about, we recorded that podcast right before everything went absolutely nuts in Orlando's previous match against Atlanta. And they ended up getting a red card and conceding the game that they looked comfortably cruising to victory in, ending their undefeated streak. But we talked about how the undefeated streak looked as pretty as unconvincing as an undefeated streak that long possibly could. A lot of 0-0 draws in there, a lot of games where they lost the XG battle, a lot of games against like not what you consider the top opponents in MLS. And so just the fact that it just seemed like they were a beatable team in a way that their record didn't really show, and the Fire beat them. I don't think that you can hold back like that and take your foot off the gas for the last hour of a game, even up 3-0 or up 3-1, and expect to get a victory against a better opponent. And I think that's a little bit of the concerning thing. I'm not, again, like, it's not like hit the panic button because it's a 3-1 win still, but it is something to be, I think, a little concerned about if you're Greg Berhalter and the coaching staff, because they didn't have answers once Orlando pushed up their line of confrontation, which they did pretty substantially, and basically denied the Fire any room to operate in the midfield.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it was actually it was interesting in a few levels, right? The idea, to me, one, it was a real strength in defense, right? I thought, one of Jack Elliott's better games, Andrew Gutman, prior to being substituted, I thought that was maybe one of the better defensive games he's played. Tim, you and I had a conversation the other day about like if you look at some of the underlying statistics and what Andrew Gutman does in breaking up play, he's actually more than a competent defender in that respect. And I think the comments I made to you at the time was like, yeah, but like one-on-one, I feel like he gets cooked pretty easily. And I not that he was a world stopper out there, but I was overall impressed by his ability in one-on-ones last night. And looking to the other side in Jonathan Dean and Christopher Cupps, I think we know who Jonathan Dean is at this point, right? Just in terms of his ability to play defensively and all that kind of good stuff. So again, perfectly capable performance from him. And I was really impressed with Christopher Cupps and how he handled pressure, not just defensively, but with the ball at his feet. And I think that to me is a little more the story of how comfortable the team looked absorbing pressure, playing out of the back and clearing the ball. At times almost to a fault, right? There were one or two times where the ball got spilled and they were trying to control it and they probably should have just cleared it out. So I think from the going forward perspective, obviously not a lot of things to critique and work on and grow from, but I do like what I saw defensively in terms of the shape, in terms of the actual controlling possession when you had it, right?
Yeah, I mean, like the Fire had 45 clearances, right? Which is, and that's a clearance every 2 minutes in a game where the ball was out of play for a lot of it. Like that's an insane number, but that still means you needed to get 45 clearances, right? And I think that's the concerning thing on the other end. Back to Christopher Cupps, just for a minute. Like I think that Berhalter said it best, where it's like if you watch the game and didn't know anyone's age or anything, you wouldn't believe that he just turned 17. And that's 100%. He looks like he fits in. He looks bigger than a lot of center backs in MLS already. And he looked competent, not just like in the stuff that you'd expect a young center back to get better at earlier, like, being able to like get onto an aerial ball or like get a clearance in the right moment and stuff like that. But he was comfortable playing out of the back, playing in possession and stuff like that. And Brady was doing a lot of distribution in the first like half hour through Cupps and not through Elliott, which I think is interesting and says something about how comfortable they think that he is on the ball.
Absolutely. DJ, what were you going to say before Tim hopped in?
I was going to say, I think it's also worth noting, yesterday the Fire played very safe, I want to say, because Pineda was already on a yellow, Cupps was on a yellow, and you had more than a few moments where the Fire didn't really, where a player, especially like Pineda and Cupps, they wouldn't go full blown on that tackle. But also you had plenty of players who were like, I know I'm going to get this. I'm going to do this. There was one, I want to say in the 85th minute or something around there, Jack Elliott made a wonderful slide tackle on a player. And it was like, you could tell that these guys were going for it defensively and they wanted to prove it. Offensively, yeah, everything suffered, but defensively, they were like, no, we're just going to hold the line and make sure you can't do anything.
Yeah. And Tim, I think you're muted.
Tim I think that like earlier in the season, you wouldn't have seen the Fire looking that comfortable with a lead, right? Like they were prone to just sometimes like what happened. It looks like the controller got disconnected, defensive gaps where it's like some guy just wasn't making the run to get back on D. Some person was completely unmarked at the far post on a set piece where it's like, there's gonna be a guy on the far post. You gotta mark him, like, stuff like that.
And lucky goals.
And none of that really happened in this game.
The one thing too that is very nice to see that's different from like the first games in April, the Fire have limited those lucky goals or the random, okay, we messed up, now we're crashing and burning. I think they had a few mistakes yesterday where it was like, if the Fire make those last year or even in the game against Columbus, everything crumbles and like the team would go downhill. But now it's like they make that mistake, they turn around and they say, okay, screw it, we're going to make a better move now.
Yeah, there's an aspect to where we'll talk about kind of how heavily rotated the midfield was at some point today. There's an aspect of Sergio Orhel not playing on the left like he normally does. He actually moved to the right in central midfield. Romani Kwame coming in, who is not typically a guy who is starting for the Fire. I do wonder how much of that is rotational issues, right? Just in terms of understanding positioning and knowing where to be, because I don't want to be like pick on this one guy, but it did seem like a lot of those big switch open gaps moving side to side were moving towards Romani Kwame, right? Where there wasn't necessarily a the fullest of coverage there. But overall, I think there was an aspect of there just was an aspect of confidence, right? And you love to see that. Like there was never there was less how do I phrase this? There was less panic in those moments where, all right, we let something slip. It was no just, hey, we let something slip, let's recover and get in front of it. And it does feel like that's a big change in tone from what we saw even 2 months ago.
Well, it wasn't 1v1 defending, right? Like we saw, I think, the team structures in place, to the point that you were making about like structures and stuff like that. Like I think earlier on in the season that people were just not comfortable enough with the structure. And so if one guy got his job wrong, there was no redundancy there. And there was a reasonable chance that somebody else was also not going to be in the right place either. And that wasn't happening in this one. And I think that was a key thing. I think Zinkernagel put it pretty well where he said like, let me get the exact quote. This group is getting stronger and it's getting closer, and it was a solid performance, especially defending for a long time. Sometimes you have to suffer, and if you suffer together, you make it, and the game was a good example of it. And I think that's sort of what happened. Like you can see the team suffering together. Individual mistakes happen. Individual mistakes are going to happen in every game for every team. It's about the team having a structure in place so that somebody's able to come in and help clean those mistakes up before they become fatal.
100%. Yeah, and I think to your point, I think we saw a lot more of that last night. Impressive growth from the defense in that respect. I also think there's an aspect, and this is maybe a good choice or a good opportunity to segue to our next topic. But I also think there's an aspect when you have two more defensive-minded midfielders in the game. I do think that's a component of it as well, right? Last night we did see some rotation in the midfield. Obviously missing Brian Gutierrez. Mauricio Pineda did end up playing, which was wonderful to see. But Romani Kwame making the start in his place, playing on that left side. There is an aspect to that where we were all kind of concerned going into this game. Where's the spark going to come from? Who's going to kind of connect play in the midfield? And then we actually see a little more potent offensive attack there, right? At least for the first 35, 40 minutes or so, help generate 3 quick goals. And just kind of a quick stat I pulled, and then we can kind of just talk it out. The Fire without Brian Gutierrez on the field, or without Brian Gutierrez starting, excuse me, actually average more goals for and less goals against. Obviously a slightly smaller sample size, but it's not nothing, right? And it's not no difference. It's a full goal less per game, and just a slight margin. It's about 10% more in terms of goals for. So I know I just kind of said a whole bunch of things, but would love to kind of hear your thoughts on the idea at large.
So just so that we say this out loud, the games that Guti has missed are the DC United game at home. That was his first suspension, which happened kind of like retroactively after the game. The game against the Vancouver Whitecaps when he was, I think, injured coming back from national team duty technically, or maybe out with it at that point, but had already been injured. The game against CF Montreal, the game against the Red Bulls, and the game against Orlando that we're talking about now. So, a good, I think, gradation of opponents there. Like Vancouver had a weakened lineup because of the call-ups that were affecting the Fire as well. But one of the top teams in the league. The Red Bulls are a good team. Orlando City are a team that everyone's expecting to make the playoffs. And, DC United, not the strongest opponent, but came out, I think, pretty well against the Fire, and the Fire were not looking great in that one. And I think that one is one where you're like, Guti could have potentially been a difference maker for the team, especially early on. But I think that is interesting. I don't want to read too much into that statistic. I think it was impressive to see Sergio Orahel stepping up and showing what he can do. He was good on both sides of the ball. And, the way that the midfield effectively played, and like, correct me if anyone looks at this differently. I mean, Pineda was playing centrally. He was more of a deep line, kind of like number 6 midfielder. Mm-hmm. And then it was kind of like twin 8s ahead of them. I don't think that there really was someone that was tasked with doing exactly what Guti does of like crashing in the box and, giving that, like, it's more ball before the ball stuff than, Guti, I think, is sometimes tasked with more like you do the play that ends up getting you an assist. And I think that worked pretty well. I think Kwame was good getting balls forward. He and Sergio had 37 pass attempts. He completed a couple more of them than Orahel. Like it's statistically a wash, but I think that it shows that they were playing similar roles. And I think having similar effectiveness in different parts of the pitch, or similar, like opposite, like sides of the same part of the pitch, maybe the better way of putting it.
Yeah, I do think there's an aspect of this too that I guess I don't pull that. I don't look at those numbers and say, "Oh my gosh, Brian Gutierrez is a problem," because I don't think anybody would say that or believe it, right? I do like this is maybe an offshoot almost of like the Kevin De Bruyne concept, where it was like, why are we bringing in a true number 10? Because we don't play with a true number 10. Brian Gutierrez is, for all intents and purposes, a 10, right? And that's kind of been almost an issue in his development because that's really not a position that's widely used outside of MLS anymore, right? So this year has almost been a transition to get him to play a little more like a traditional 8, obviously with more going forward, of course. So
more
I
of a flat
almost
midfield trio, right? Is basically the way the Fire have typically been playing. This, I think, was a little bit of a different tweak with Gutierrez out, where it was Pineda, I think, was deeper for parts of it, and then it was Orahel and Kwame that were ahead of him and kind of more like traditional number 8s,
yeah. And
but,
I say all that to say, right, like that to me. So that to me does seem to be the system that Greg would like to be running, right? It's a little bit closer to how he played with the U.S. men's national team, right? Like when we think about Musa McKennie and Adams, like that is kind of that pairing. It's two guys who can box to box, one guy who's a little bit more of a destroyer, but can still handle the ball and can still get forward and participate if he needs to.
Maury
again,
would love the being called Tyler Adams right now. Just putting that out there.
Hey, let it, Maury, if you're listening. You're there, man. No, but
You're the Fire's Tyler Adams.
Yeah, absolutely.
Somehow that just seems like that just seems like an insult in some way. Like, as much as I love the team, that just it's like
you're Tyler Adams without the injuries.
Yeah,
that's
you're
true.
Tyler Adams, but
he has generally stayed healthy. I think one thing is Brian Gutierrez himself. He's talked about kind of preferring that midfield role. I don't know if that's a newfound thing. Before this year, I think we talked about his defensive play, which was a short conversation because there wasn't any. And I think we've seen a lot more of that from him. I don't know if that's, maybe some of what's getting the suspensions of him feeling like he's got to do something he's not comfortable with. I'm giving him an easy out there for some stupid plays that shouldn't have happened. But sometimes when you're not comfortable with something, kind of cheating a little bit and being cheap is one of the ways to try compensating. And maybe that's what we've seen. I don't know. But I think it does pose a question of like, what is it that Brian Gutierrez is supposed to be doing in the midfield that nobody else can do? And how is he supposed to be succeeding? Like 5 goals and assists this year in 762 minutes, which is not, I mean, that's good production on a per 90 basis. But a couple PK goals in there, and the early brace against Columbus when I think nobody knew what to expect from the Fire. So I think you do sort of wonder, what is that next step going to look like for Brian Gutierrez if he sticks around Chicago for the rest of the season? And as skilled and talented as he is, if you can't trust him to handle both sides of the ball responsibly, including the defensive stuff that has gotten him into trouble, including, missing this match this time, it's like, do you trust him enough to stay as the team's locked in starter for the next year or whatever?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the logical furthest conclusion of this, right? And maybe the answer is it is just kind of in everybody's best interest if Brian Gutierrez gets a move to wherever, right? Because obviously there's interest. Obviously, I think we all agree he's incredibly talented and has a really high ceiling, right? It's always just been about actually attaining that. And I think that's kind of the larger part here where I don't think the idea for Greg is to play in a 4-2-3-1 like we've seen in the past. It is very much that kind of flat 4-3-3, potentially with more of a 6 or more of a flat 3. And so I don't mean to be the guy that's like, are we holding each other back, right? Are we asking him to not play in his best form and maybe we are not playing in our best form We being, I'm speaking from the club's perspective there, because
Yeah,
the
and I think
the relationship doesn't match up.
I think that the easy comparison to make is another Fire Academy midfielder, Georgi Mihailovic, who also has an insanely high talent ceiling, and a little bit of a different situation just with family stuff, like the importance of soccer in that family and everything else. But it did feel like he was becoming. He felt like too big of a fish and too small of a pond, and that was coming out with some of the stuff that we saw on the pitch and off the pitch. And for his development, both in terms of tactically, in terms of his play on the ball and off the ball, but also in terms of his maturity, he needed to leave the comfort of home. And I do wonder if Guti is in a similar situation where he would benefit from time playing somewhere else. And if him being here is holding himself back in that way from having to make a painful adjustment of maturity and just coming into a club where he's been the golden boy of that generation of Fire players from a very young age for a majority of his life almost at this point. And sometimes that keeps you from challenging yourself as much as you need to be.
Sometimes you just got to leave the nest, right? And hey, speaking of guys who may be leaving the nest soon, next talk about rotation is one that has not happened yet, but will be soon. And that is Chris Brady. We know he was just recently called up with the United States men's national team. He could be gone for up to 5 games, depending on if he's called up to the Gold Cup roster and how far the United States make it into the Gold Cup. Now, if recent results or anything, it won't be long. But he's one of 4 keepers in the camp, and he does seem to be the 4th guy in at the moment. That said, we are going to get Jeff Gall for at least a couple games. And while some of us
least
believe
one,
maybe,
right? I think that past that, we're not as sure. But, it's and to just answer why the 4th goalie, we're talking about this as opposed to crazier things have happened. Zach Steffen out with an injury. You'd assume that the fact that he was brought into the USMNT camp means that they think he will be good to go, at least for the Gold Cup. But if that recovery is delayed in some way or something like that, you want 3 goalies in your camp with you. You don't want to go into a tournament with just 2. And so you'd assume that Brady would be the next one up.
Yeah. It is a good time to see the defense gelling, right? Because obviously now we're expecting at least one. I feel like probably maybe 2 plus starts from Jeff Gall. We did see a good amount of time from him earlier in the season. Played about 150 minutes or so after Chris Brady's red card against. Was that against Orlando last time as well? Yeah,
it was.
So kind of interesting.
And so it's sort of funny the way that the red cards ended up being such a weird part of the narrative in different ways, because I think without that also meant that Gall got his first start the next week and he looked good. Yep. He got the win. And I think without that, we're, the Fire would be in a position where it's oh man, they've got to trust a guy that has, played against an MLS team in a US Open Cup game or something like that. And that's it. And do we feel comfortable with seeing him in net for up to a month? And it's a different situation because we've seen Gall get in there. We've seen him look pretty comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, look, to be candid, anytime you're calling on a 30-year-old who's been playing most of his minutes in MLS Next Pro to be your starting keeper, it's not going to feel good until you see him do something good. And so, to your point, Tim, I think I was overall more impressed than I expected to be with his performance in both games. Not just in his, some good shot stoppings. He looked comfortable, I think was the big thing to me. He didn't look out of his depths. And so, a little bit of it, I suppose, is we are going to cross our fingers on it. But
just to get into the calendar of things really quick, the Gold Cup itself, the US's first match is Sunday, June 15th. So that's the day after the Fire's match at home against Nashville. There's 2 friendlies before that. One next Saturday, US versus Turkey, and then one the following Tuesday. If Steffen recovers in time for the Gold Cup, you would kind of assume, I mean, obviously, we're all impressed with Chris Brady. If Poch and his staff get as impressed with Chris Brady as we are, that probably changes the depth chart a little bit, and maybe he becomes the 3rd choice there. But if he stays the sort of fourth choice in the camp for the Gold Cup. Maybe he sticks around for those 2 friendlies and then heads back, assuming Stefan's healthy. So that would mean he would potentially be available for that game against Nashville. And so would just miss the one game next week against TC.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing, like we talked about, is kind of wrap it up here, but the interesting thing is kind of what we talked about in the preview. I don't know that any of those guys is head and shoulders above any of the others, to be candid, right? I think I would be, I mean, I'm not maybe not equally, as surprised, right? Certainly would be more if he ends up like starting, right? But if you told me that Chris Brady went into that camp, ended up playing in one or maybe both of those friendlies, I don't think I would be shocked, right? And then maybe didn't start in the Gold Cup or something like that. But versus if he went to the friendlies, didn't play at all, and came back, I don't think either would be a tremendously surprising outcome to me.
Yeah, and again, like the other goalies, just really quickly, Matt Freese from NYCFC, who we just saw, Zach Steffen from the Colorado Rapids, and Matt Turner, nominally of Crystal Palace.
Yeah, or not. Well, is it Nottingham Forest now that the season's over?
I think that he's signed with Crystal Palace, and I think the loan was the Nottingham, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think that he will be. I would be surprised if, come the next season, he was at any of the clubs we just mentioned. So
I think I've put this out into the universe before, but I'm going to say it again. I still think there's a very real chance. This is not reporting. This is purely my meatball instincts. That Chris Brady gets sold and the Fire sign Matt Turner. It's the perfect thing to set United States men's national Twitter into a spiral. I'd love to see it.
Oh, come on. Berhalter getting called up already did that. They've melted down. They're gone. That was the biggest single contribution to humanity that Mauricio Pochettino could possibly make.
Imagine a summer transfer window of Matt Turner and Gio Reyna. Imagine what that would do to the world.
Oh, Fire sign Gio Reyna, Matt Turner, one window. Tactical manager on Twitter deletes account.
One can only hope, DJ. One can only hope. Moving on here. Last thing we want to talk about today. There's a new big 3 in town, and they play in Chicago, right? Another stellar performance, at least in the first half, right? From Hugo Kuipers, Philip Zinkernagel, and Jonathan Bamba. We've talked a bit about Bamba's performance, but I think, Tim, to your point, you could talk about it a little bit more if you want. Doing a lot of the dirty work that is not necessarily showing up on the stat sheet right now. Couple interesting just little stats here before we kick it around a little bit. But Fire currently have 28 goals scored in league play. That's 7th in the league with 2 games in hand. So they're sitting right now 4th in goals per game, behind only Miami, San Jose, and Philadelphia. So in terms of putting up numbers in the time allotted, it's an impressive group at the moment. And as mentioned before, not all of that is coming with a tremendous amount of help in the midfield. Tim, I guess what's obviously a wonderful game from Kuipers and Zink last night. What do you think is pushing the Fire towards the top of that leaderboard?
From the get-go, we talked about how Berhalter's system ends up being pretty offense-friendly, right? Which is sort of weird because the reputation that he had with like a certain segment of U.S. men's national team fans is he was too defensive-minded and didn't try to go for wins. I mean, I think that says a lot more about the way that the player pool works than anything else. But we've seen the team be effective in creating space for the attack and in a way that we just haven't seen. And predictability with the system allows guys to thrive. And I think that's what's really helping. And to talk about Bamba just for a minute, he technically is, I believe still he's tied for 3rd on the Fire in terms of goal contributions. He is with 6 combined with Brian Gutierrez, just not counting MLS assists on this one. But it's 2 goals and 4 assists for him. So it's not like he has been a stranger to the box score, but in this game against Orlando, and something we've seen from him a lot is he is lying a little bit deeper than you'd necessarily expect a winger like that to be lying, and he is there to get outlet passes from the midfield. He's there to, sometimes recover balls and stuff like that, really helping the midfield out, and then get a switch to like Zinkernagel, who then will connect with Kuipers or something like that, right? And I think that's valuable. Again, like sometimes that shows up as an MLS assist, sometimes it doesn't, but I think that's the role that he's been tasked with more. Berhalter's talked about wanting to get him to score more. It's just when you look at his career, I bet every coach he's had in his professional life and probably before then has been telling him like, you're smart, you're talented, you're fast. Like you need to get in and start taking more shots and getting in on goal more. And obviously it hasn't really sunk in an effective way, because if it did, Jonathan Bamba would have been a $34 million transfer to some team instead of a like $3.4 million transfer to some team this past offseason. Maybe that changes, but I think that even if it doesn't, he still can do a lot to help the offense. And I think he's been doing that, just not in the way that shows up in the highlight reels as much as you'd hope.
Yeah, and we did talk about that, right? When he came over from Celta Vigo, was you look at his box score, it's not very impressive. And then you look at the underlying numbers and in terms of what he does in his progressive passing, his progressive receiving, I think there are still holes in the game, right? And there are for everybody. Obviously, nobody's a finished product necessarily. I think the one thing I think I wrote a note down last night that was like, Jonathan Bamba thinks he's Messi. He's clearly not. Like he loves to take those one-on-ones and just it unfortunately hasn't been the most successful for him this year. So there are still aspects of the game that you would like to see some improvements, some changes on. But yeah, overall, I think you're seeing from all three forwards, right, a really strong willingness to get involved in the midfield, be not only willing but capable defenders, right? They're all good at breaking up play. We know the value Hugo Kuipers brings aerially on the defensive side. So yeah, I think I've been maybe the most outspoken Jonathan Bamba critic, and I still think there is a case for giving Marin Haile Selassie some run, just in terms of maybe even just giving Bamba some rest, right? Getting him off the field or letting Philip Zinkernagle recover a little more as well. But it is hard to deny that when those three are clicking, it looks like the most dangerous attack in MLS, right? Or it could be. I think I even said to maybe it was one or both of you last night, like, you can make a strong case for Philip Zinkernagle and Hugo Kuipers to be in the MLS MVP conversation when they're playing at their highest level. And to his credit, Jonathan Bamba plays a large role in that.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where the frustrating thing has been there's some guys where you see them performing at a certain level and you're just, comfortable. Like, okay, this guy's not lighting the league on fire, but like you can tell he's out there, he's working, and we're getting the contribution from him that we expect he can put in. And like that's his level, is basically the short way of saying that. I think the frustrating thing with Bamba is just you see some of the stuff he does in some individual moments, and you look at some of the big moments he's had for the Fire, and you think there should be more of those big moments, because it feels like he does have another step he could reach. Not that it's from lack of effort or anything like that. Like it looks like he's been working his butt off out there a lot of the time, but it's frustrating that you're not getting that little extra thing, whether that's a system thing, a comfort level thing, or individual play thing. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's what you're looking for. And again, like I think it's fine to be happy with where you are, but it's also fine to be expecting more.
Yeah, 100%. I think, like I said, maybe the biggest thing has been, to me at least, his willingness to take those one-on-ones and then not complete them. And maybe to your point, Tim, that is still just a little bit of a system adjustment, right? Or a coaching point from Greg of like, be aggressive, take those opportunities. And when you get one off, to be fair, he can put it in from almost anywhere, right? We know he has that ability in his bag. So maybe it is just a little bit of an adjustment period. We always talk about that with guys in MLS, right? It can sometimes take a full season to acclimate. We've seen the difference, Hugo Kuipers 2024 to 2025. So yeah, we'll see how the rest of the season unfolds for him in that respect, and we'll keep rooting for him. I mean, hey, look, to be fourth in terms of goals per game at this point in the season is probably not something we would have expected at years at the outset of the year. So it certainly feels like a win in that perspective.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like we've been seeing stronger defensive performances from Bamba and from the rest of the squad. So it's like both of those things are heading in the right direction going into not quite the second half of the season. Fire still have 2 more games at the halfway point. But I think that there's a lot of reason to be hopeful that the team is still climbing towards a higher ceiling rather than they are like kind of cruising at the level that they're at.
Absolutely. That feels like as good a place as any to kind of wrap things up, fellas. Anything you want to get in before we take off here?
With Hugo Kuipers now having gotten 10 goals this season, he is now only the third person in the last decade to do that. Only because John put it in the notes and we completely glossed over it. Or someone put it in. I think it was John.
I think Tim asked that question, but yeah, impressive performance from Hugo Kuipers. And not even at the halfway point yet, and he's sitting at 10 goals and how many assists?
2 assists, 10 goals, 2 assists.
Yeah.
So 12 goal contributions. It's a crazy golden boot race here in MLS. It's insane. I still think he's got a good chance of taking it.
I don't think anybody had it on their bingo card that the current leader at about the halfway mark of the MLS season for the golden boot would be Ty Barbo.
No, Ty Barbo is not, or like Sam Surridge in second. Like that's not.
Well, we gave Sam Surridge like 4, to be fair.
Well, you're still up there. Like they all count the same in the end. But tied with Messi. But by the way, in terms of expected goals, I didn't look as of after this game. I looked before the game, but Kuipers was number 2 in the league behind Lionel Messi. So that's pretty good company to be keeping. Suggests that there's a higher ceiling for him. And again, the crazy thing is like he's not the only guy that's been taking penalty kicks for the Fire, which it seems wild to me. Like I appreciate Greg like saying like, oh, it's we have a system. The guy that's feeling it gets to take it, and everyone seems to be doing well with that, and that's great. But like, you got a guy who could win the Golden Boot. Like, let him take the PKs.
To your point there about XG, this is I guess where I'll kind of wrap here. Fast because I was looking at the stats here and I was like, oh, I wonder what Hugo's XG is. So Hugo Kuipers 10 goals on 13.4 expected goals. Maybe the crazier stat in the other direction, Philip Zinkernagel 6 goals on 2.47 expected goals. So wildly overachieving his targets there. Kind of just two interesting sides of the spectrum on that one.
So the funny thing is, like, I think it may have been, I can't remember who asked the question to Zinkernagel last night, but somebody said, do you like getting, what do you like more, creating for others or getting goals? And he basically said the professional answer, like either is fine. But then he said, but last night, like it felt like the goal that I got was kind of cheap. And I'm like, who says that, right? Like, I get it. Like Pedro Gaisi doesn't normally bobble that and it normally stays out of the net. But who's like, yeah, I didn't really like that goal that much. It didn't feel that special to me. Like, come on, man, you scored a goal.
It's like, Phil, you don't understand what this means to us, dog. Like, you don't understand what it means for us to score that goal and not them. Like to see a Fire player be on the right side of something like that, it feels pretty good. But hey, that's as good a place to wrap up as any here. Thank you so much for joining us once again. It's a pleasure to have you. It's a pleasure to be able to do this a couple times a week. Keep an eye out for the preview we'll have coming this week, as well as the Fire head to Washington, D.C. to take on DC United, hopefully without Christian Benteke. I mean, we hope he's okay, but we just don't want to face him. As always, keep an eye out on the socials.
Okay, just not yet.
Yeah, I hope he's like fine, but just needs one more week. No, as always, keep an eye out on the socials at Men in Red 97, at MIR97 Pods on Twitter. That's where you can keep up to date on all the things we do. You can also take a peek at the website, right? That's where you're going to find wonderful reporting from Tim, from Alex, from Max, from all the people who know all the things and have all the information you could possibly want. And then, honestly, a little bit more after that. But as always, thank you so much for joining us here, for DJ, for Tim, for Austin, our wonderful producer, who probably already started playing the song. And if he hadn't, then he will now. Maybe he'll just bump it up. I don't know. Thank you for joining us around the bonfire. And come on, you Men in Red.